Good afternoon, good morning, good late afternoon to some of you joining us. My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council. Welcome to today's In-Service podcast presentation. I am incredibly pleased to be joined by one of our newest advisory board appointees. His name is Aaron Salow. He is the CEO of XOI Technologies. Aaron, a warm welcome to you. We'll get to an introduction in just a moment, but thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, John.
Outstanding. So we're going to kick things off in just a moment, but we are covering what I think is a real important topic, and that is this concept of death by app, overcoming tech fatigue. Excuse me, I'm tongue twisted today, on the job site. So how many organizations out there have struggled with technology adoption? How many organizations out there have struggled with not enabling their frontline enough so? Raise your hand. I'm looking at you. Real important topic. We're going to dive into a lot of critical areas of this. I'm also joined by my colleague, Gerardo Pelayo. Gerardo is our Vice President of Research and Advisory. He'll be moderating the inside parts of our discussion today. Hello to Gerardo. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
Outstanding. So before we get kicked off here, housekeeping. Today's session will be recorded. It will be accessible both on LinkedIn. We're having some troubles with Twitter or X in terms of our live streaming. So if that's where you're listening, our apologies. We'll try and resolve that. But we're on YouTube, LinkedIn Live. Hello, we see you. And we're recording today's session. It'll be available post-event on our website, as well as all the different podcast channels you subscribe to and get your podcast from. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get things kicked off. Aaron, we know you well. Maybe our audience could learn a little bit more about yourself. Maybe a personal introduction first, and then we'll go into the company.
Yeah. Excited to be here. Thanks again for having me. XOI is based here in Nashville, Tennessee. That's where I'm talking to you here today. Weather's plenty warm, which is good for business for a lot of our customers. We're cooling down a little bit. I'm originally from Michigan. If you notice the lack of a Southern accent, although my wife tells me a word or two will slip out from time to time, it has a little bit more drawl on it. But excited to kind of talk through these topics, because I think it's one of the most kind of ignored things that field service companies don't look at when it comes to technician fatigue and application and technology. Growing up in Michigan, I built a deep appreciation for blue collar men and women that do hard jobs. And it's kind of, I was surrounded by those folks. Everyone I knew and loved worked with their hands. I almost kind of had this sense for a long period of time, this is the only thing that you did, to earn money, because every person in my family did it. And so built that deep appreciation for people that are doing that work, and look to solve problems for folks that do that work. And excited to work with XOI and a bunch of smart people to do that. Moved down here probably 20 years ago, seen a lot of growth in Nashville, and continue to work on solutions for men and women in the field that work really hard.
Outstanding. And for those that are listening that don't know XOI, maybe you could talk a little bit about XOI's footprint.
Yeah. So, the impetus for starting XOI was really this solving the skilled trades gap. So we kind of saw young and dumb enough to start a company that said, hey, there's a skilled trades problem. I've experienced it as a young man working in a factory in construction since I was in my teenage years. And I've seen it in my professional career. We can use smart glasses to solve this problem. So that was, if those of you that are out there remember these front page headline news about smart glasses infiltrating field service, a lot of that was XOI back in the day. We haven't sold a pair of smart glasses in quite some time. I think they have very applicable use cases for a lot of things. Difficult when you're on a roof, 110-degree heat index, need Wi-Fi, et cetera. And so we transitioned to mobile applications, but we focused very much on the job site. We understood a few things, that the job site was really underserved by technology, that every key stakeholder in the ecosystem focused on the job site, cared deeply about what happened on the job site, from the OEMs to distributors to field service providers, the technicians themselves, of course, and the customer, whether that's an asset owner of some kind, the commercial side, or residentially, the homeowner. And so really started to develop solutions critically for that space, making sure they were continuous, not episodic. Kind of fast forward, 500 plus customers, tens of thousands of technicians across North America, Latin America, and Europe, and continue to focus on the human being fixing mission critical equipment and the environment that sits in.
Outstanding. I'm going to turn things over to Gerardo to lead us through today's discussion.
Yep, thank you. And that's a great segue because one of the things that we try to do in our research, on top of reaching out to the service leaders, we also go out to the front line and understand their perceptions. And change is a big theme there. We want to see how that the expectations and the requirements are changing versus the resources that are available. And for the 2024 survey on the voice of the field service engineer, which is live by the way, we see that over 70% of techs say that the management and the customer expectations are higher, that the knowledge required about the product and about technology is higher, but less than half of them say that technology has made it easier to get the work done.
Yeah.
So by your nodding, I assume you've also seen this. Can you share a little bit of your perception on that, and what have you encountered?
Yeah, the average technician is using 9 apps on any given job site. They're asked to use applications that are very episodic in use. So it's not something they need on every job site. So it's like, I have this special thing that's happening that I need to go figure out some information. What was that app I was given, my username, password, et cetera? We see that across all of our customers. And then you see, of course, lately, you see a lot of companies building technology for technology's sake. So I think it kind of breaks down, boardrooms have created enterprise AI use cases. In that, boardrooms at technology companies are saying, we got to do something with AI, so build something. And what that creates is, really an experience in the field that's a lot to be desired. So I'd break it into those 3 things. App overload in general by every stakeholder. I think it's important to point out that OEMs, 9 apps at the App Store. Distributors, 6 apps in the App Store. The contractor has pushed a few apps out there, right? The customer requires you to log into a separate app to engage with them. And so kind of this just massive overload. Episodic use cases, which is a big challenge with change management. And then companies building technology for technology's sake. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that would be a takeaway for a lot of tech companies out there.
Yeah, no,
Aaron, I have, sorry, Gerardo, I have some additional commentary about this disconnect, right? And it's a likely outcome when you take into consideration the fact that 60% of responding field service engineers to last year's survey indicated that they didn't feel that management listened or enacted their feedback to change management within the company. Mm-hmm. And just as worse, 41% indicated they didn't have a role in innovation. And when we look at those 2 data points this year, last year's survey had over 3,000 engineers, where early returns, about 10% of that so far this year. We've seen some growth with respect to listening. It's dipped all the way down to 24, 25%. So it's significant growth, very positive and shows signs of growth in terms of establishing listening posts and doing all the good things we need to do. But what is flat is the role in innovation, or the feelings that they have a role in innovation. It's 41%, equivalent to last year. Yeah. And so we must change our mentality from a post-mortem mentality to a pre-mortem mentality in terms of involving the frontline in these innovation opportunities.
Well, in what capacity are you listening? Right? Because to me, that listening could be in the form of a survey, or we had a town hall and we took some feedback, made everyone feel good. I would highly recommend companies get in the field.
Yeah.
It sounds simple, but that's executives all the way from the top down. Go on job walks, go on field visits with your technicians, because when they're in the limelight and the spotlight saying, hey, what can we do better? And they come up with some ideas, et cetera, watch what they're having to deal with every single day. The nuances of that. Wait a second, you just went to this other, why did you go do that? Oh yeah, well, my boss told me that we had to do this thing for this reason. What you'll notice is a lot of broken processes, especially as you get in larger companies that are multiple locations, states, regions, all over the world. Things are done differently, and the ability to understand that is critical. So I would certainly encourage that. Not every idea is a great one, but being able to consolidate those ideas and then filter them and share specifically what actions are happening as a result is another thing to think about when it comes to getting that feedback and making people not only just listening to them, but being active with them and then showing that they're being heard. And too many companies that we see have a seat in an air-conditioned office and they go, oh, we got a thing and it does that, or they do this. When's the last time you watched them do that thing? Not one of your people, not someone that's supposed to, world of should. When's the last time you did? And if you're making technology decisions for the business, it's absolutely critical.
Back to you, Gerardo.
I agree. And building on that, one of the interesting inputs that we got as well is that 4 out of 10 engineers feel that the data that they're getting through their mobile devices is excessive. So it's not a lack of pushing out information. It might be a quality versus quantity thing. Have you seen something like this, and especially as you brought it up? Do you have any real world example that you can comment on to bring this to life?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of them. One that comes to mind is a customer of ours that we hold in high regard, and we've been able to help really address this. But when we met, 31, just to give you a sense of it, 31 applications were loaded to a technician field worker's device when they were hired, 13 of which were required use. And you get a sense of that app fatigue pretty dramatically when you think about 31 and 13. And the reality of that is, if you think about where the industry has been over the last 15, 20 years, technology businesses, really focused on the business first. FSM ERP companies said, hey, we're coming in. Why? Because technicians weren't signing the checks. So it kind of makes sense, human nature from that perspective, but also kind of shines a light into why we're in this situation. As they said, hey, the check writers, what do they need? What does the office need? And so the technicians, the field workers were an afterthought. The engineers were an afterthought, which is crazy because that's the product. If you think about what the product of these companies are, at least that's the thing executing the product. The product is uptime of equipment. Who executes that uptime of equipment? An engineer. Why can they do that? Well, because they have critical skill sets. They're the skilled trades. So understanding the asset and the human and the environment they're in has been an afterthought of 20 years of technology work. And so the idea that things are hard to use as a result, of course, right? Of course, because we left the field to their own devices. And the reality is, like, I'm going to type in a 29, alphanumeric serial number for an asset, probably not. So I don't have good asset information. My notes are, I came and fixed it. My buddy writes a book. The next guy doesn't do anything. So you have really siloed data, bad information. So this idea that I'm getting a bunch of information, but it's not relevant, it's not accurate, it's not based on the piece of equipment I'm standing in front of, it makes sense that that's the case. And that's what we see across our customers. And so what we've done is we've really taken an approach that says, hey, how do we consolidate that technician experience? Our customers that work with us believe that earning technician trust earns them market share. And that's all the way down the stakeholder chain. I love it. That's where we have to go, because in the midst of all the problems our industries are experiencing, regulatory, changing equipment, skilled trades problems, supply chain, that is the final frontier that we have to solve for.
I love these viewpoints. First of all, the 31 apps gives me an absolute ice cream headache. I mean, that is brutal. But when we look at the early returns, and we're going to look at this concept of time spent looking for information, but year over year, last year, the time spent looking for information has remained in the number 2 spot. And I don't want to steal Gerardo's thunder on his upcoming questions and discussion. The top dislikes, remain paperwork and admin, right? Leader in the clubhouse. If you're a golf fan, the British Open is happening right now. In this year's survey, what we're trying to do is actually quantify the amount of time on those said activities, right? How often are they not in front of the customer? Are they not solving problems? How often are they on their mobile phone looking for information, performing these tasks? Yeah. And right now, the early returns suggest it's about 43% of their day. So just some quick commentary on some of the statistics that we're seeing early returns. But some interesting data points that kind of speak to this data fatigue.
It would be interesting to understand the difference between looking for information, i.e. things, information or knowledge that's helping me as a engineer with my critical function on the job site relative to looking for information or a form that this OEM needs me to fill out to get support or to register a warranty, or I need to go to this app to look up parts, which would be relevant to the critical side. So I think there's two buckets. There's kind of the busy work of, the web forms, the applications, the inputs, and then there's what am I getting that's relevant to me at the right time. And if I'm adding that 10th app to that average of 9, or in that customer's case, the 14th app to go get information, am I helping, versus the whisper of where information should come to you, meaning the context of a technician's job, any technology should be whispering information as they go through their normal cadence of work. Hey, I got some information for you that's relevant to this. I heard you say this. What about that? That's the place where you want to engage a tech, not yet go to yet another place to find that information.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that, and it's interesting how the dots start to connect, because on one hand we see we're getting too much information, but at the same time is I spend too much time looking for information. And what you bring up of what type of information, that's the critical nuance that sometimes gets lost at the strategic level. So you've talked about a couple of the items in how to get trust from the front line. Are there other nuggets around people process related conversations that get lost right now and lead to this contradicting statistics of too much data but not the right data?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we often lose, and we see this as an industry, the what's in it for me, the with them for that engineer. And I think that if you start to align what's in it for them, you will often find that it's also advantageous for the customer and advantageous for other players in the ecosystem. So one of the things that we've deployed, for example, on behalf of an OEM is a kind of factory installation framework. Now, you may say, well, not every technician needs installation instructions, right? Smart guided operations that XOI provides. So why would they document this if they don't really need it? Well, when you add in warranty registration and the fact they don't have to go to another web form to go make that happen, and it just happens for them automatically. When you add in technical support from that OEM in context of that installation, that startup and commissioning, now you're addressing what's in it for them. Why would I go do this if I'm a 25-year vet who doesn't need to say, then I don't have to go do those 3 other things? That's awesome. It also grabs a cert from the right certification industry. It pulls this in. I'm not going to that website. And so I think what's in it for them is critical. Also understanding motivation. So we learned early on that field service engineers care way more about what their customers think than what their boss makes them do. So this idea that customers getting some sort of enhanced deliverable from what's happening in the field, and them giving communication to that technician or engineer saying, hey, thank you for this. This helped me with my boss. This helped me get something delivered and done. That goes much further than the service manager pounding on them to use something that they deployed. And so when we think about those opportunities, we think, okay, what's in it for the technician? How does the customer win? Because great techs care a lot about that's where they get that proud moment, right? They solve the problem. In fact, I had an HVAC technician, one of our customers, at my house this last weekend. I have a 9-month-old baby girl, and I'm like, my house is getting hot. I need you to come help me fix this. And of course, my wife knows that I'm like, all right, honey, I'll see you in 2 hours. Because she knows when there's a tech at our house, like, I'm dialed into that guy. I'm like, he's like, oh, I love XOI. I'm like, great, but what do you hate about it? How can we be better? And what about this? And going deep with him. But the moment you could see, when I'm holding my little girl and the house is cooling down, and he smiles and he's like, hey, sweetie, da, 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 da. You could just tell, like, that was the moment. It wasn't necessarily we got paid there and this and that and the other, but he's like, hey, I made sure that kid was comfortable in their house, right? And so I think same thing applies to anything. Like, there's such a proud moment. So how are we taking that and going, hey, how do we make those moments even better? Because that will allow technicians to go, hey, I'm going to go back to that. And the flip side of that is I covered my butt when there was a bad customer who said I didn't do a good thing, and I go, but I did. And here it is. And this is what it looks like. So we think about those things quite a bit when it comes to embracing technology. For every dollar you spend on technology, companies will spend 3 on change management. Some recent data that just came out. Someone can fact check me on where that came from. I'll have to find a link on it, but really impactful, and it aligns with what we see on our customers as well. So thinking through those things are much more critical than people may think.
Wow, that's an interesting stat you bring up there. Every dollar on tech, $3 on change management. That's an interesting one. One of the things I want to point to in terms of what's in it for me, in the area of which capability needs to improve, we ask that question amongst field service engineers. And early returns, again, we're at about 10% of where we were last year. We're seeing a return of the elusive spare part come back, right?
Mhm.
So we're
Yeah.
seeing inventory visibility, parts ordering. We're seeing the ability to transfer truck stock to and from another colleague. That's number 1, 3, and 5 in terms of capability they'd like to see improved. What is encouraging are the steps that have been taken to reduce the dependency on phoning a friend.
Yeah.
So we've seen that early returns again. So we're going to continue to monitor. It's consistently hovered around 80%. That's the dependency on phoning a friend. This year, we're seeing it drop about 11% year over year. And while this could change as we get more data, it's still encouraging nonetheless early returns. So we'll continue to
Mhm.
monitor that one.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And build looking at the complement on that statistic, John talked about the what can be improved from what is available right now.
Mhm.
A new question that we incorporated this year is, what are the things that you don't have today that you believe could add a lot of value into the way that you operate? And number 1 was spare parts visibility, but the number 2 through number 5, they were all technology related. It was about the better IoT data, access to the telemetry. It was AR, VR capabilities, live video, IoT to help them, AI to help them troubleshoot. So that the story that it starts to tell me is there's a willingness to adapt to the times, to adopt technology, as long as it actually makes the work easier, and it makes the points that that you've called out the more the more relevant. So that with that willingness to adopt, are there, and as you talked about the change management, what are some best practices that you've seen to actually get this across the finish line?
Yeah. So I think, kind of alluding back to a comment I made earlier, and something I'm passionate about is, companies looking to solve for this problem, they have to understand the landscape on the job site first. And so the job walk, sit with your techs, report back in detail is a critical first step, because you'll find a multitude of things they're doing you never thought they were doing or they shouldn't be doing, but they are. And the result of that will allow you to start to pull together those pieces. So it's easy to start kind of thinking about blue sky applications and really cool things that we could provide, building technology for technology's sake. Yeah, we're doing a whole bunch of other things here. I can't tell you how many times we sat with customers like, do you realize we went out with your techs, they're still using paper for this? They're like, what? We're using paper for it. Yeah, well, yeah, there's this thing, there's this, right? So my encouragement would be, do that first. Once you look at that, go, what is the smallest possible ask from the engineer or tech and the biggest possible outcome? So I'll use our business as an example. When a technician takes a picture of a data plate, we kind of follow this path, and this is a way to think about structured data and generally job site technology. Engagement will create structured data. Solid engagement creates structured data, which will create insights, which will allow you to re-engage those stakeholders. And the reality of that engagement, that's the hardest part, because you need something that's continuous, not episodic. You need to give something of value every time that's very simple and easy to use. Follow that path down when we built OCR years ago. So we're like, gosh, we're talking to tech, spending time in the field. We still do a ton every single day. And it's like, yeah, why don't we have good asset information? end of life information, how these assets perform, how technicians should perform on assets. Well, guys just don't really put it in the platform. But gosh, they should just take a picture. We'll use computer vision and we'll make this happen. So we did that. And we started noticing our OCR engine was faster and faster and faster. And we're like, well, this asset is kind of the core to a lot of things you just mentioned. Parts, live video AR support, history of that asset, training information. What if that simple picture of a data plate also, instead of just writing it back to their FSM ERP, also delivered to them in near real time all the contextual information about that asset and connected them to expertise in that asset? And so then we deliver journeyman. And so there was an engagement, and then that created data. That data allowed us to create insights off that data and then re-engage that user with continually improving and innovating what that looks like. And so in practice, addressing a lot of things that you just mentioned, because small ask, big return. So a small ask of a picture or selection from a dropdown, if I've been there before, gives me all that relevant information. I'm not going to a separate application. Another example would be safety. So one of our customers that come to mind, it leverages a software for EH&S, right? Environmental health and safety. They use it in that organization for a ton of different things. But we drill down to what is the engineer touching that system for? Well, they're doing pre-test safety planning. What do they do? Where are they going to do that? Oh, they have an app for that. So they have to go to this app and do that. We simply, one step further, what's the adoption rate of that? It was low. Why? Episodic. So not only was it not being done, it was the only reason. We never say, oh, you should rip all that EHS software out of your system. We go, hey, let us handle the technician's engagement with that and send your EH&S system richer data from the field. That just becomes a conditional required step within a technician's workflow versus another app in another form and duplicating information. It's better information for the EHS folks. It's way easier for a technician, and adoption rates went up into the 95+ percentile, which is great because safety is important. So that's an example of sitting in the field, watching where they're going, realizing that although this is a big system we use in one part of the business, the technician's interaction is like this. How do we create the smallest possible ask for the tech with the biggest potential outcome? That's an example of dialing in app fatigue, right? And then also having measurable, meaningful results.
John, do you want to comment or?
I'd be happy to react. First of all, I love how you've taken it from a macro level to a micro level in terms of the different use cases and work streams of an engineer and a technician. You know, how do they understand the customer history, the asset history? On some of the more complex products, the serialized components that have warranty entitlements or do not, right? So that is such a huge missed opportunity in terms of profit or cost contributions to the bottom line, and ultimately all of the above equate to an effective field service visit. So I think you guys are really mapping this out according to the engineer's needs. More holistically, in terms of change management, in terms of driving engagement and avoiding app burnout, but tech fatigue in general, we're seeing a holistic strategy around the removal of friction, right? We're also seeing two other areas, listening and engagement. I talked a little bit about how that was lacking last year. And then career pathing and opportunity established to drive that further engagement. And one of the things that is encouraging revisiting that phone a friend concept when you get stuck. One of the ones that's come about that's shocking this year is the self-consult your own organization's knowledge base, which is an interesting sort of second choice, a greater dependency on the technology that's enabling them in the field on that removal of friction component. And the year-over-year data is still early, but I think it's quite encouraging that there's a greater dependency on these assets we're putting at their fingertips. One of the other things that I reflect backwards on and looking at the 2023 data to talk more about this holistic strategy is at least 1 in 4 respondents reported feeling either somewhat or very dissatisfied in career opportunities, mentoring and guidance from their superiors or others, and learning and development opportunities. So yes, we're talking about the fatigue and the friction they encounter in the field. But if we're talking about removing the fatigue, which is causing them to depart from the career, which is still a trend, We haven't revealed that data yet, but it's still there. Then we have to think more holistically around all these other aspects as well. So that would be my supplemental points that I would make.
Yeah, it's interesting. We just recently did a study. We're working on a white paper this year on it as well. We couldn't find it. I think it's something we'd all agree is a real need, and certainly we'd agree it's a good thing, is training, certifications, things like that. We couldn't find it out there, so we decided to run our own study on it, and in the financial impact and the asset diversity that is tied to an individual that's gotten a certain type of certification and then continuing education over time. And the results were really dramatic. 17% higher revenue on groups that maintain certifications and continuing education, and 7% more diverse equipment. These type of things need to be surfaced to contractors, to FSPs, to owners, but they also need to be delivered back to the technician. So being able to give them, you talk about adoption, gamification, engagement, those types of things. Think about looking at the digital resume of any given field service engineer. Like Sally, what's her capacity? First time fixed rate, what model numbers does she work on? How often does she see those things? Those are massive sales opportunities. Imagine talking to a new group and saying, hey, look at my crew. They work on these model families. They're this effective at it. Look at your building and what we're going to be servicing for you. We're the clear choice. No one's selling in that way. Look at our reputation. Look at, we're great. We're awesome. Look at our other customers. It's all the same types of things, whether it's commercial or residential. And so when you really focus on the human, the asset, and the environment, what comes out of that is dramatic for every stakeholder. Part of my own journey of getting some new units at my house, I got a good, better, best, right? I got a good, better, best option. And there was some eye-on-line, some other, efficiency scores and things to evaluate. How powerful would it have been? This is something that we're working on now, to go, hey, Aaron, in Nashville, Tennessee, you have units that are this old. This is what we're proposing you into. Based on the environmental parallels here, based on how patterns tend to work, this is the recommendation that we have, because this is how units actually perform in Nashville over a long period of time. People don't have that data. They're not used to being sold that way. Right? It's just, us, right? We're going to do it good, right? Or it's price, or whatever the case may be. And so this focus on the job site and those three kind of themes is a major unlock in multiple different ways.
I want to double click real quick. Gerardo, I'll let you get back in. Sorry. You said something that really spoke to me, and this was I think I heard it correctly. Those engineers that have a certain level of training certification were causal in nature to 17% greater revenue on the client base that they were servicing.
Because of the number of jobs that they were able to do over an extended period of time was on average 17% more, and 17% more revenue than folks that did not have that certification and continuing education. Significant difference.
Outstanding. Because we always talk about the shift in mentality from a KPI perspective, from a lagging indicator to a leading indicator, in terms of what are those causal factors to the achievement of an outcome metric, right? So, and oftentimes, I don't know if it's just me, but we kind of go to these like eroding KPIs. It's always the negative, right? The glass half full. But what you're talking about is the glass half empty. And now we're talking about the glass half full concept here, where these are contributing factors to revenue growth because of the correlation of training, certification, and continuous education and achievements.
That's right.
And I love that.
Yeah.
I want to double click on that for our audience. I think that's a great point you make there.
Yeah, and for folks, I had a customer that mentioned this to me, and we had a spirited conversation. He's like, "Well, yeah, but if they have all that data, if we share that with them, they'll want more money." Yeah, that's great, because you talk about retention. You should want technicians performing at that level, and you want that career path. You talk about career pathing, John. You start to see that increment up and what you're able to do. Why not attach that revenue creation for a business and what you've been working on from a resume perspective to guide that career pathing, and say, look, this is the contribution to the company. Here are the things you can do to increase your contribution to the business. We're actually measuring that now. we want to pay you. We want to overpay you because we know that you are critical to our success. So those are the kind of things you have to understand to allow those types of programs to work.
I really like that. And so to reinforce this points, one of the things that we've seen earlier, talked about more than 70% calling out the change in the demand side, the requirements and expectations. Well, less than half think that the training, that the quality of training has improved. And we go back to supply doesn't seem to fit the demand. And when we talk about the clarity of the processes, that's even lower. That's 21% of respondents that think that has increased. So the observation, the statistic that you bring to the table, that's a great motivator to say, well, it is worth spending in training. It is worth spending, and here's how you connect the dots between the two.
And how do we customize those learning programs for the individual? If we don't know what they've worked on, how effective they've been, what their challenges have been, we don't really track that data writ large in any field service industry, right? And so I would guess that the reason those training programs aren't effective is because they don't have a sense of what Joe needs versus Jim versus Sally versus Sue. They are putting block training out there and going, hey, everybody, this is the next thing that our OEM distributor is coming to town to talk about. Sit down versus going, okay, here are the opportunities to take a level 1 tech up, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And it emphasizes the point that just because something is available doesn't mean that it's easy to consume or that people know about its existence. So great point. And talking about new KPIs or innovative ways of transforming the business, one of the elements that we've double clicked on this year in the survey is mental health, and an expectation that a hope, if you will, that one would have is that mobility devices have helped people become less mentally stressed because things are easier. You have more information. You feel like you have a safety net. And only 43% of respondents agree with this, that their mobility devices, meaning the bundle of the applications and the communication that they receive through that, has helped them become less mentally stressed. You've mentioned in other conversations this concept of a single pane of glass. Is there a connection between the two in your mind? These being less mentally stressed. So I'll let you elaborate.
For sure. Yeah. So I think there's a great talk. It's probably 10 years old or so. A guy named Darren Hardy. He talks about critical functions. I reference back to it quite a bit, and it's helped me as a professional over time go, what are my critical functions within a business, and how do I devote most of my time there? I think where you'd see a lot of the fatigue in general is where is an engineer or technician devoting time that isn't the reason they got into this work to begin with. I think we can all identify with that. And certainly there's going to be moments of things we all have to do, we don't really want to do, but the critical functions are problem solvers. They kind of want to be their own CEO. They want to make the customer happy. Anything that isn't in those boxes, it's extra and it's dragging me down and I have to deal with it. And so how do we kind of clean that up? Our team launched AI summaries, for example. That's busy work, right? So there's about 1% of you out there, if you're an engineer or technician listening to this, that do love writing a novel at the end of a service call. 99% are like, I came and fixed it. And it creates all sorts of problems because they're like, the office is like, I can't bill 15 grand and I came and fixed it. I need more help. So our product team, really proud of how they took that first stab, is they were really saying, hey, this is busy work that we can solve. These guys are already in here. Let's write it for them. Let's give them lots of different options so they can form into what they want to do. That's an example of thing that's not a critical function of a technician, right? It's a required function, but not a critical function. And so I think when you look across safety, you look across technical support, you look across the fact that another stat that's fascinating, one of our customers ran, how many people are called when there's a problem on a job site. On average, it's 4 to 5. They actually looked at phone records to do this because they own all the phones. They can do that. So it was very validated, and it's wild. Like, issue on site, guy calls 4 or 5 other people, right? And so I think those are the kind of things that that you have to consider when it comes to app fatigue. You know, those guys feeling like this isn't contributing on mental health. I think the personal consumer side is a whole nother reason why mobile devices create mental health problems for all of us. News, social media, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think that the professional responsibilities of enterprises is to look at that and say, what are the critical functions of this very important group of people, and how do we allow them to do more critical functions in a meaningful time?
On the mental health side of things, I just want to double click. First of all, I appreciate all your points there, Aaron. I think you make a lot of great ones there. And in response to some of the things you talked about, you talked about autonomy and not being tied to an office. And while those are some of the things that drove them to wanting to be an engineer, those are also some of the causal factors that cause mental health, right? Isolation, time away from family, travel, long hours, arduous work, right? It beats you down in some industries. It's a hard job. So, you know, the mental health crisis is still upon us. Of course, it was heightened in the pandemic, but according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, a little greater than 1 in 5, almost 1 in 4, 23% of adults in the United States experience some form of mental illness, and yet only half of them seek treatment for it, 47%. So yes, the encounters that they have and their friction points in the day certainly contribute to that mental health and wellness achievement. But there are other factors that we need to be cognizant of in terms of helping to eliminate, avoid, or to support our front lines, given the hard job that it is. So
no question. And an interesting kind of, you know, point to think about along those lines, John, is I think when it comes to technology, and of course that's the lens that we're talking about here today, and there's a myriad of other things that need to be addressed within these, especially in groups that tend to maybe look at it shrinks and that kind of thing. And I think the reality is we need to support that within our businesses and continue to, because it is an important problem that needs to solve. On that same line, you talked about supply chain being one of the big issues. It's interesting as we've done different solutions around supply chain, or we've seen different episodic solutions out there. A lot of technicians in Nashville, Tennessee want to go to Eddie's Hardware to get their parts. It's not because it's the most sexy, fastest technological way to do it. It's because there's free coffee, donuts, and they get to BS about the Titans game. Pretty good for mental health, right? Because human connection. And so this idea that like, well, yeah, but technology should allow you to, and you got the human psychology of someone looking for connection. So there's that consideration in businesses. Same thing with the 4 or 5 other guys they're calling for support. Then maybe it's annoying, maybe that's difficult, but also, you know, you see the game, and so thinking through what necessary connection field service engineers need, and if technology is removing that potential for connection, is the other side to think about it too, you know, and encouraging that, to your point. So just another angle to kind of consider all these things.
Absolutely.
Yep. I wanted. Did you have a point there, John, or?
I was going to build on. I'll save it for our next question. I'll build off of it. There's a parallel between customer and employee that I'll talk about in a little bit, but keep going, please.
Good. So we've been talking a lot about the information and the data that we pass on to the front line, and I want to also look at the other way around, the information that comes back. And first off, a couple of data points that resonated as you were talking about the mental health and what is important for the engineer. They enjoy solving the problem for the customer, right? And we asked how easy is it for you to provide the customer feedback upstream your organization? Less than 1 in 3 said that their organization made this process easier. And a thought there is that could actually be an opportunity to help amplify the moment of satisfaction of I made the I resolved the problem for the customer, and now I get to communicate it back upstream. It helps with escalations as well, but it's a way to shape the experience of the engineer. And building on that, and as we're getting closer to the last third of the podcast, looking at some positive use cases, we see that 22% of the of engineers, only 22%, agree that data capture has become easier. So what we go back to, why should organizations invest in this? Is there light at the end of the tunnel that they can leverage the data that comes back from the field? Do you have any examples where the inputs that the engineers provide, not in the preparation but live when doing the work, have helped the organization in other aspects of the business?
No question. Being able to, in our world, XOI guided workflows allowing you to capture rich information, sending it to the right people immediately. That's massive when it comes to sales. It's massive for opportunities to start building proposals, building an analysis of the problem, also for safety. So real-time guidance on the job site. The other thing is, to your point, kind of connecting the technician to the customer allows you to get that feedback as well. So the mechanisms we provide is that an end customer can give feedback on the work that's done. In our world, there's very rarely a customer that is actually on site with that engineer. And so inherently, people have built a level of distrust in field service because they don't understand it. It's mysterious. You want to charge me a bunch of money for a thingamajig, you might as well be a whatchamacallit, right? Those types of things. And so increasing transparency and trust is massive, especially in a world in which, economic conditions, inflation, everything's getting scrutinized, budgets are getting scrutinized more. The ability to have that visibility and trust builds reputational alignment a lot faster for those new technicians coming online as well. So trust and transparency and communication, and then getting that edification back from the customer in a myriad of different ways is highly critical to everything that I just mentioned.
Very good. And sorry, I got muted there for a second. And I think I had heard you talk about a specific situation where the engineers were originally only allowed or only had access to capture data ahead of the work, in particular in health, safety, and environmental situations. And is there value in shifting this, especially as building on your earlier concept of episodic versus continuous work streams? I don't know if that rings a bell or.
Yeah. I think earlier we talked a bit about kind of the health, environmental health and safety, and in their interaction with a field engineer in the field, and the viability of another episodic application with limited data that doesn't give kind of rich information to the right constituents. I think another example is field quality. And so, those customers we have that are also manufacturers have very little visibility into the field quality in real time of their equipment, back to quality control, back to the manufacturing environment. And so that's another example where the ability to capture relevant information about how equipment's performing in real time, that symptom issue resolution, that feedback loop that can quickly hit the right constituents that actually make that equipment is immeasurably valuable, especially when you provide an ecosystem where not just their W-2 employees are giving that feedback, but anyone else that they've given that access to that information. And so you have I described it to one company like this. Imagine if you had your smartest technical person and your best salesperson on site with every technician. What would that look like? Well, I'd have them guiding them every step of the way. They wouldn't make that mistake on step 3. We'd be able to give them the right part, the right time, exactly when they needed it. All these things would be happening in real time. That's a big part of our vision and goal at XOI. And so it kind of gets them thinking differently. Like, if I had an expert on every job site, whether it was my employee or not, what would happen? what implications would that have across my business? And it really starts getting your gears turning on everything that happens on any given job site.
Yeah, no,
You know, I have some commentary behind some of your points there, Aaron. We have been talking about this concept of driving engagement of the frontline by building what we call a technician agnostic platform. And when you look backwards, right, the whole upskilling, reskilling with the engagement crisis and the talent crisis that the industry still faces, both because of retirement as well as the opposite end of that, which is lack of engagement at the younger demographic. Creating this technician agnostic platform, there's a wheel of fortune of items that you need to be considerate of, right? It is, to your point, inventory visibility, customer history, asset history, pre-visit case history, right? There's about 25 different things that are wrapped around this wheel of fortune that help you create this platform. Yeah, it might not all always be used on every instance, but if it is accessible and that empowerment platform is established, it is there should it need to be. And so I would just continue to encourage, organizations and those listening to think about this concept of a technician agnostic platform, which is any engineer that goes into any scenario is empowered with the same inputs, outputs, and capabilities that require them to be effective in the job. And so that's the message that we've been harping on for years, but wanted to bring it again because I think it's an important one. So
yeah, it's a great call out for sure.
Great. So as we're nearing the end, are there any other gotcha elements that we haven't covered that you'd like to share with the audience that organizations tend to miss leading into this tech fatigue? We've covered a number of use cases, but
yeah. I think in summary, and beating this drum again, I think it's getting a deep, real understanding of what's happening in the field. I think it's looking at every constituent that also, I don't think I hit this as hard earlier, but not just what you've deployed or you think you've deployed, but what their interaction with every other stakeholder looks like in the ecosystem. So the OEMs, the distributors, what the customer has made them log into and leverage. So getting a feel for all of those different touch points. John just said it well. What are the inputs, outputs? What are the outcomes of those things that we can really simplify? And then how are we engaging? Although you may not end it in every site, what is the conviction that I do have around the things that do have to happen on every job site in order for us as a company to be successful? And how do I tie into what's in it for the technician in that process? There is this other side of the pendulum, and I'll say this carefully, where it's kind of it's really presented, I think, with false justification. Well, we care so much about our technicians, we let them do whatever they want. And as a result, we've got all this crappy data, and every other technician has crappy data when they're on site, et cetera. This isn't about forcing techs to do things they don't want to do. It's about understanding what's core to your business, ensuring you take the time so they understand it as well, and having the conviction that that continuous portion of their workflow is a requirement. That is critical. And so it's like a lot of things in our culture, the pendulum swings are like, we put all the crap on the techs, we made their lives horrible. Now we're like, hey, they can do whatever they want. And then it's like, well, yeah, but now we have all this crappy data and it really we're losing people, pisses people off, all these different things. I think it's identify that world, understand where your convictions lie. It's the human, it's the asset, it's the environment. You're selling uptime. And then understand where those pieces fit together to the smallest possible ask, biggest potential outcome.
Aaron, it's funny. In addition to those, when we let the technicians and engineers do whatever they want, good luck with carrying $1 billion in spare parts inventory carrying costs in terms of opening up the kimono there. Yeah. It was an interesting debate and discussion I had with a previous webinar guest, where I was advocating that, number 1, 3, and 5 technician wants and needs was greater capabilities around inventory visibility, ordering, and transferring parts to and from a colleague. And I said, well, why don't we just let them order their own parts? Let's go. And the webinar guest was like, yeah, hold the boat. That can certainly inflate your carrying costs on inventory. So there's some parameters and some things you need to be considerate of. One of the things I'd call out two things that I think are missed opportunities, Gerardo, just building off of Aaron's points. One of which is, and I've talked a little bit about this, the establishment of listening posts, involvement, a sense of involvement from the front line. If you want to avoid the flavor of the month mentality when you roll out a new capability or a new technology, just involve your front line. Aaron talked about, getting involved, getting in the field, listening. Just do it. Start now. It's not too late. Get out there. The other thing I would say is the parallel between customer and employee experience. If you think about all the good things we've established in terms of listening to customers, sentiment mining, communication, when you talk about a service visit, right? What was one of the things introduced, a couple decades back? Texting ahead, right? Giving them visibility. Where are you? Why don't we do all of the above inside our organization? It was a keynote speaker, Elizabeth Dixon, former Chick-fil-A executive, who delivered a keynote that said, the customer experience is the overflow of your employee experience. Mm-hmm. So we can learn from how we treat our customers and similarly treat our employees the same way and do a lot of the same things that we do with our customers inside the organization. And then lastly, the third thing I'd say is, going back and beating the drum about, fatigue and mental health. According to last year's survey, nearly 70% of frontline agents reported that they were working more than 40 hours a week. So we're seeing continued evaluation of, extended service networks, independents, partners, dealers, channel partners, even competitors offering multi-vendor services. How can we collaborate better so we control brand experience? Mm-hmm. We heard a lot about that at our recent Coca-Cola event down in Atlanta, where we were talking about controlling the controllables and establishing parameters around empowerment across that complex service network. Consider halftime, three-quarter time, so that you avoid burnout, and then all the other things we've talked about. Removal of friction. The technician agnostic platform is something we've been beating the drum on for many years, and I think it still rings true. So those are some of the things that I would harp on in terms of some takeaways for our listening audience.
Good stuff.
I think that's a great way to summarize the session, and being consistent with these points about really understanding the front line, understanding the people that we work with. Aaron, you've shared so many nuggets in this 60 minutes. Do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself as well, a passion outside of work, perhaps, that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah. It's funny. I was just talking to my two older sons, 6 and 3 years old, about smart risk versus dumb risk, and when it comes to like trying things. It's like, so we were able to be on a boat last weekend. Would you jump off when it's going 40 or not? It's funny. They go, Dad, you're on motorcycles all the time and you fly planes. Is that smart risk or dumb risk? I'm like, well, that's smart. I got training for those things, kind of. But I would say outside of faith and family, which are two the most important things to me, love motorcycles. I just rebuilt one. I don't get to get my hands dirty professionally like I once did. So I do it in the garage on the weekends and fail and try to get better. Fly airplanes, just personally, which is fun. And can't wait to do either of those things again soon.
That's outstanding. Well, listen, he is Aaron Salow. Thank you, Aaron, for joining today's In-Service podcast event. A couple of takeaways for our audience that we left you with. Today's session will be recorded, accessible behind here. Listen, we want to plug all the things and activities that are coming down the path. The Smarter Services Symposium is certainly one of which we want to make sure we raise awareness to. September 9th through the 11th, we'll be in Chicago hosting 350 plus director, VP level service leaders over the course of 3 days. Great conference, and this year is setting up to be our best yet. The agenda is white hot. So if you're looking to join us and continue the dialogue similar to what we did today, mark your calendars. Aaron, thank you so much for being a board member. Thank you for today's discussion. It was really, really rich. Thank you very much.
John, Gerardo, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you guys.
Cheers.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.